American Royals by Katharine McGee. Prologue. You already know the story of the American Revolution and the birth of the American monarchy. You might know it from the picture books you read as a child, from your elementary school performances, when you longed to play the role of King George I or Queen Martha, and instead were cast as a cherry tree. You know it from songs and movies and history textbooks, from that summer you visited the Capitol and went on the official Washington Palace tour. You've heard the story so many times that you could tell it yourself. How, after the Battle of Yorktown, Colonel Louis Nicola fell to his knees after General George Washington and begged him on behalf of the entire nation to become America's first king. Of course, the general said yes. Historians love to debate whether, in another world, things might have gone differently. What if General Washington had refused to be king and asked to be an elected representative instead? A prime minister, or perhaps he would have made up an entirely new name for that office, like president. Maybe, inspired by America's example, other nations, France and Russia and Prussia, Austria, Hungary, and China and Greece, would eventually abolish their own monarchies, giving rise to a new democratic age. But we all know that never happened, and you didn't come here for a made-up story. You came here for the story of what happens next, what America looks like 250 years later, when the descendants of George I are still on the throne. It is a story of soaring ballrooms and backstairs corridors, of secrets and scandals, of love and heartbreak. It is the story of the most famous family in the world, who play out their family dramas on the greatest stage of all. This is the story of the American Royals. Chapter 1. Beatrice, present day. Beatrice could trace her ancestry back to the 10th century. It was really only through Queen Martha's side, though most people refrained from mentioning that. After all, King George I had been nothing but an upstart planter from Virginia until he married well and then fought even better. He fought so well that he helped win America's independence and was rewarded by its people with a crown. But through Martha, at least, Beatrice could trace her lineage for more than 40 generations. Among her forebears were kings and queens and archdukes, scholars and soldiers, even a canonized saint. We have much to learn by looking back, her father always reminded her. Never forget where you come from. It was hard to forget your ancestors when you carried their names with you, as Beatrice did. Beatrice, Georgina, Frederica, Louise of the House of Washington, Princess Royal of America. Beatrice's father, His Majesty King George IV, shot her a glance. She reflexively sat up straighter to listen as the High Constable reviewed the plans for tomorrow's Queen's Ball. Her hands were clasped over her demure pencil skirt, her legs crossed at the ankle. Because, as her etiquette teacher had drilled into her, by hitting her wrist with a ruler each time she slipped up, a lady never crossed her legs at the thigh. And the rules were especially stringent for Beatrice, because she was not only a princess, she was also the first woman who would ever inherit the American throne, the first woman who would be queen in her own right, not a queen consort married to a king, but a true queen regnant. If she'd been born 20 years earlier, the succession would have jumped over her and skipped to Jeff, but her grandfather had famously abolished that centuries-old law, dictating that in all subsequent generations, the throne would pass to the oldest child, not the oldest boy. Beatrice let her gaze drift over the conference table before her. It was littered with papers and scattered cups of coffee that had long since gone cold. Today's was the last cabinet session until January, which meant it had been filled with year-end reports and long spreadsheets of analysis. The cabinet meetings always took place here in the Star Chamber, named for the gilded stars painted on its blue walls and the famous star-shaped oculus overhead. Winter sunlight poured through it to dapple invitingly over the table. Not that Beatrice would get to enjoy it. She rarely had time to go outside, except on the days she rose before dawn to join her father on his run through the Capitol, flanked by their security officers. For a brief and uncharacteristic moment, she wondered what her siblings were doing right now if they were back yet from their whirlwind trip through East Asia. Samantha and Jeff, twins, and 3 years younger than Beatrice, were a dangerous pair. They were lively and spontaneous, full of bad ideas, and unlike most teenagers, had the power to actually carry out those ideas, much to their parents' regret. Now, 6 months after they'd finished high school, it was clear that neither of them knew what to do with themselves, except celebrate the fact that they were 18 and could legally drink. No one ever expected anything of the twins. All the expectation in the family, and really in the world, was focused like a white-hot spotlight on Beatrice. At last, the High Constable finished his report. The king gave a gracious nod and stood. "Thank you, Jacob. If there is no further business, that concludes today's meeting." Everyone rose to their feet and began to shuffle out of the room, chatting about tomorrow's ball or their holiday plans. They seemed to have temporarily set aside their political rivalries. The king kept his cabinet evenly divided between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, though Beatrice felt certain those rivalries would be back in full force come the new year. Her personal security detail, Connor, glanced up from where he stood outside the door, next to the king's protection officer. Both men were members of the Revere Guard, the elite corps of officers who devoted their lives to the service of the crown. "Beatrice, could you stay for a minute?" her dad asked. Beatrice paused in the doorway. "Of course." The king sat back down, and she followed suit. "Thank you again for helping with the nominations," he told her. They both glanced at the paper before him, where a list of names was printed in alphabetical order. Beatrice smiled. "I'm glad you accepted them." Tomorrow was the palace's annual holiday party, the Queen's Ball, so named because at the very first Christmas ball, Queen Martha had urged George I to ennoble dozens of Americans who'd aided the Revolution. The tradition had persisted ever since. Each year at the ball, the king knighted Americans for their service to the country, thereby making them lords or ladies, and for the first time he had let Beatrice suggest the candidates for knighthood. Before she could ask what he wanted, a tap sounded at the door. The king gave an audible sigh of relief as Beatrice's mother swept into the room. Queen Adelaide came from nobility on both sides of her family. Before her marriage to the king, she'd been set to inherit the Duchy of Canaveral and the Duchy of Savannah. The Double Duchess, people had called her. Adelaide had grown up in Atlanta and had never lost her eternal southern charm. Even now her gestures were touched with elegance. The tilt of her head as she smiled at her daughter, the turn of her wrist as she settled into the walnut chair to Beatrice's right. Caramel highlights gleamed in her rich brown hair, which she curled each morning with hot rollers and wore encircled by a headband. The way they were sitting, apparent to either side of Beatrice, boxing her in, gave her the distinct sense that she was being ambushed. "Hey, Mom," she said in a slightly puzzled tone. The Queen wasn't usually part of their political discussions. "Beatrice, your mother and I were hoping to discuss your future," the king began. The princess blinked, disconcerted. She was always thinking about the future. "On a more personal level," her mom clarified. "We were wondering if there was anyone special in your life right now." Beatrice startled. She'd expected this talk sooner or later, had done her best to mentally prepare herself for it. She just hadn't assumed it would be quite so soon. "No, there isn't," she assured them. Her parents nodded distractedly. They both knew she wasn't dating anyone. The entire country knew it. The king cleared his throat. "Your mother and I were hoping that you might start searching for a partner, for that person you'll spend your life with." His words seemed to echo, amplified, around the Star Chamber. Beatrice had almost no romantic experience to speak of. Not that the various foreign princesses near her age hadn't tried. The only one to make it to a second date had been Prince Nicholas of Greece. His parents had urged him to do an exchange program at Harvard one semester, clearly hoping that he and the American princess would fall madly in love. Beatrice went out with him for a while to please their families, but nothing had come of it, even though, as a younger son of a royal family, Nicholas was one of the few men actually eligible to go out with Beatrice. The future monarch could only marry someone of noble or aristocratic blood. Beatrice had always known that she couldn't date the wrong person, couldn't even kiss the wrong person, the way everyone else at college seemed to. After all, no one wanted to see their future monarch walk of shaming home from a college party. No, it was much safer if the heir to the throne had no sexual past for the press to rake through, no baggage from past boyfriends, no exes who might sell intimate secrets in a tell-all memoir. There could be no ups and downs in Beatrice's relationships. Once she publicly dated someone, that was it. They would have to be happy and stable and committed. It had been enough to make her steer clear of dating almost entirely. For years, the press had applauded Beatrice for being careful with her reputation, but ever since she turned 21, she'd noticed a shift in the way they discussed her love life. Instead of dedicated and virtuous, the reporters had begun to call her lonely and pitiable, or worse, frigid. If she never dated anyone, they complained, how was she supposed to get married and start the all-important business of providing the next heir to the throne? "Don't you think I'm a little young to worry about this?" Beatrice asked, relieved at how calm she sounded, but then she had long ago been trained to keep her emotions hidden from public display. "I was your age when your father and I got married, and I was pregnant with you the following year," the Queen reminded her, a truly terrifying thought. "That was 20 years ago," Beatrice protested. "No one expects me to. Things are different now. We're not saying you should run to the altar tomorrow. All we're asking is that you should start to think about it. This won't be an easy decision, and we want to help." "Help? There are several young men whom we'd love for you to meet. We've invited them all to the ball tomorrow night." The Queen unclasped her pebbled leather handbag and pulled out a folder, colored plastic tabs peeking from its edge. She handed it to her daughter. Each tab was labeled with a name: Lord Jose Ramirez, future Duke of Texas; Lord Marshall Davis, future Duke of Orange; Lord Theodore Eaton, future Duke of Boston. You're trying to set me up? We're just giving you some options, introducing you to young men who might be a good fit. Beatrice flipped numbly through the pages. They were filled with information, family trees, photos, high school transcripts, even the guys' heights and weights. Did you use your security clearance to get all this? What? No. The king looked shocked at the suggestion that he would abuse his privileges with the NSA. The young men and their families all volunteered this information. They know what they're signing on for. So you've already talked to them, Beatrice said woodenly. And tomorrow night at the Queen's ball, you want me to interview these potential husbands? Her mother's brows shot up in protest. Interview makes it sound so impersonal. All we're asking is that you have a conversation with them, get to know them a little. Who knows, one of them might surprise you. Maybe it is like an interview, the king admitted. Beatrice, when you do choose someone, he won't just be your husband. He will also be America's first king consort. And being married to the reigning monarch is a full-time job. A job that never stops, the queen chimed in. Through the window, down in the marble courtyard, Beatrice heard a burst of laughter and gossip, and a single voice struggling valiantly to rise above the din. Probably a high school tour going past on the last day before holiday break. These teenagers weren't that much younger than she was, yet Beatrice felt irrevocably distant from them. She used her thumb to pull back the pages of the folder and let them fan back down. Only a dozen young men were included. This folder is pretty thin, she said softly. Of course, Beatrice had always known that she would be fishing from a tiny pond, that her romantic options were incredibly narrow. It wasn't as bad as it had been 100 years ago, when the marriage of the king was a matter of public policy rather than a matter of the heart. At least she wouldn't have to get married to seal a political treaty, but it still seemed a lot to hope, that she might fall in love with someone on this very short list. Your father and I were very thorough. We combed through all the sons and grandsons of the nobility before we compiled these names, her mother said gently. The king nodded. There are some good options here, Beatrice. Everyone in this folder is smart and thoughtful and from a good family, the type of men who will support you without letting their egos get in the way. From a good family. Beatrice knew precisely what that meant. They were the sons and grandsons of high-ranking American noblemen, if only because the foreign princes around her age, Nicholas or Charles of Schleswig-Holstein or the Grand Duke Pieter, had all already struck out. Beatrice glanced back and forth between her parents. What if my future husband isn't on this list? What if I don't want to marry any of them? You haven't even met them yet, her father cut in. Besides, your mother and I were set up by our parents, and look how that turned out. He met the Queen's eyes with a fond smile. Beatrice nodded, a bit reassured. She knew that her dad had picked her mom just like this from a short list of pre-approved options. They had met only a dozen times before their wedding day, and their arranged marriage had ended up blossoming into a genuine love match. She tried to consider the possibility that her parents were right, that she could fall in love with one of the young men listed in this terrifyingly slim folder. It didn't seem likely. She hadn't yet met these noblemen, but she could already guess what they were like, the same type of spoiled, self-absorbed young men who'd been circling her for years, the type of guys she'd been carefully turning down at Harvard each time they asked her to a final club party or fraternity date night, the type of guys who looked at her and saw not a person but a crown. Sometimes, Beatrice thought traitorously, that was how her parents saw her too. The king braced his palms on the conference table. Against the tan skin of his hands glinted a pair of rings, the simple gold of his wedding band, and next to it the heavy signet ring marked with the great seal of America, his 2 marriages, to the Queen and to his country. Our hope for you has always been that you might find someone you love, who can also handle the requirements that come with this life, he told her, someone who is the right fit for you and America. Beatrice heard the unspoken subtext, that if she couldn't find someone who checked both boxes, then America needed to come first. It was more important that she marry someone who could do this job and do it well than that she follow her heart. And truthfully, Beatrice had given up on her heart a long time ago. Her life didn't belong to her, but her choices were never fully her own. She had known this since she was a child. Her grandfather, King Edward III, had said as much to her on his deathbed. The memory would be forever etched in her mind. The sterile smell of the hospital, the yellow fluorescent lighting, the peremptory way her grandfather had dismissed everyone else from the room. I need to say a few things to Beatrice, he declared in that frightening growl he used just for her. The dying king had taken Beatrice's small hands in his frail ones. Long ago, monarchies existed so that the people could serve the monarch. Now the monarch must serve the people. Remember that it is an honor and a privilege to be a Washington and devote your life to this nation. Beatrice gave a solemn nod. She knew it was her duty to put the people first. Everyone had been telling her that since she was born. The words, "in service to God and country," had literally been painted on the walls of her nursery. From this point onward, you are two people at once, Beatrice the girl and Beatrice heir to the crown. When they want different things, her grandfather said gravely, the crown must win. Always. Swear it to me. His fingers closed around hers with a surprising amount of strength. I swear, Beatrice had whispered. She didn't remember consciously choosing to say those words. It was as if some great force, perhaps the spirit of America itself, had taken temporary hold of her and snatched them from her heart. Beatrice lived by that sacred oath. She had always known that this decision was looming in her future. But the suddenness of it all, the fact that her parents expected her to start picking a husband tomorrow, and from such an abbreviated list, made her breath catch. You know that this life isn't an easy one, the king said gently, that it often looks so different from the outside than it really is on the inside. Beatrice, it's crucial that you find the right partner to share it with, someone to help you through the challenges and share in the successes. Your mother and I are a team. I couldn't have done any of it without her. Beatrice swallowed against a tightness in her throat. Well, if she needed to get married for the country's sake, she might as well try to pick one of her parents' choices. Should we look through the candidates before I meet them tomorrow? She said at last, and opened the folder to its first page. Chapter 2. Nina. Nina Gonzalez clattered up the stairs at the back of the lecture hall, headed toward her usual seat in the mezzanine. Below her stretched hundreds of red auditorium chairs, each affixed with a wooden desk. Almost every seat was occupied. This was Intro to World History, a required class for all freshmen at King's College. King Edward I had decreed as much when he founded the university back in 1828. She rolled up the sleeves of her flannel shirt, and a tattoo flashed on her wrist, its angular lines inscribed on her burnished sienna skin. It was the Chinese character for friendship. Samantha had insisted that they get the tattoo together to commemorate their 18th birthdays. Of course, Sam couldn't very well be seen with a tattoo, so hers was somewhere decidedly more private. You're coming tonight, right? Nina's friend Rachel Greenbaum leaned over from the next chair. Tonight? Nina reached up to tuck her dark hair behind one ear. A cute boy at the end of the row was glancing her way, but she ignored him. He looked too much like one she was still trying to get over. We're meeting in the common room to watch the coverage of the Queen's Ball. I made cherry tarts using the official recipe, the one from the Washington cookbook. I even bought cherries from the Palace gift shop to make it authentic, Rachel said eagerly. That sounds delicious. Those cherry tarts were famous worldwide. The Palace had served them at every garden party or reception for generations. Nina wondered what Rachel would say if she found out how much the Washingtons secretly hated those tarts. Honestly, it would have been more authentic if she'd cooked barbecue instead, or breakfast tacos, both of which the royal family ate with shocking frequency. So you're coming, right? Rachel pressed. Nina did her best to look regretful. I can't. I actually have a shift tonight. She worked at the university library shelving books as part of the work-study program that funded her scholarship. But even if she hadn't been busy, Nina had no desire to watch the coverage of the Queen's Ball. She'd attended that ball several years in a row, and it was pretty much the same every time. I didn't know the library was open on Friday nights. Maybe you should come with me. Some of the seniors still have finals. You might meet an older guy. Nina Only you would daydream about a library meet cute. Rachel shook her head, then let out a wistful sigh. I wonder what Princess Beatrice will wear tonight. Do you remember the gown she wore last year with the illusion neckline? It was so elegant. Nina didn't want to talk about the royal family, especially not with Rachel, who was a little too obsessed with them. She'd once told Nina that she'd named her pet goldfish Jefferson, all 10 of them in succession. But a deep-seated loyalty to Samantha made Nina speak up. What about Samantha? She always looks beautiful, too. Rachel made a vague noise of disagreement, ignoring the question. It was an all-too-typical reaction. The nation adored Beatrice, their future sovereign, or at least most people adored her, except the sexist, reactionary groups that still protested the act of succession to the crown. Those people hated Beatrice simply for having the temerity to be a woman, who would inherit a throne that had always belonged to men. They were a minority, but they were still vicious and vocal, always trolling online photos of Beatrice, booing her at political rallies. But if most of the nation loved Beatrice, they positively swooned over Jefferson, with what sometimes felt like a single collective sigh. He was the only boy, and the world seemed willing to forgive him anything, even if Nina wasn't. As for Samantha, at best people were entertained by her. At worst, which was relatively often, they actively disapproved of her. The problem was that they didn't know Sam, not the way Nina did. She was saved from answering by Professor Urquhart, who started up to the podium with ponderous steps. There was a flurry of activity as all 700 students broke off their murmured conversations and arranged their laptops before them. Nina, who was probably the last person still taking notes by hand in a spiral notebook, poised her pencil on a fresh page and glanced up expectantly. Dust motes hung suspended in the bars of sunlight that sliced through the windows. As we've covered all semester, political alliances through the turn of the century were typically bilateral and easily broken, which is why so many of them were sealed through marriage, Professor Urquhart began. Things changed with the formation of the League of Kings, a treaty among multiple nations, meant to assure collective security and peace. The League was founded in 1895 at the Concord of Paris, hosted by Louis. Nina silently finished. That was the easiest part of French history. Their kings were consistently named Louis, all the way up to the current Louis the 23rd. Honestly, the French were even worse about Louis than the Washingtons were about George. She copied the professor's words into her spiral notebook, wishing that she could stop thinking about the Washingtons. College was supposed to be her fresh start, a chance to figure out who she really was, free from the influence of the royal family. Nina had been Princess Samantha's best friend since they were children. They had met 12 years ago when Nina's mother, Isabella, interviewed at the palace. The former king, Edward III, Samantha's grandfather, had just passed away, and the new king needed a chamberlain. Isabella had been working in the Chamber of Commerce, and somehow, miraculously, her boss recommended her to His Majesty, for there was no applying to jobs in the palace. The palace made a list of candidates, and if you were one of the lucky few, they reached out to you. The afternoon of the interview, Nina's mom, Julie, was out of town, and Nina's usual babysitter canceled at the last minute, leaving Nina's mama, Isabella, no choice but to bring Nina with her. "Stay right here," she admonished, leading her daughter to a bench in the downstairs corridor. Nina had found it surprising that her mama was interviewing in the actual palace, but as she would later learn, Washington Palace wasn't just the royal family's home in the capital. It was also the administrative center of the crown. By far, the majority of the palace's 600 rooms were offices or public spaces. The private apartments on the second floor were all marked by oval door handles, rather than the round ones downstairs. Nina tucked her feet beneath her and quietly opened the book she'd brought. "What are you reading?" A face topped by a mountain of chestnut hair peered around the corner. Nina instantly recognized Princess Samantha, though she didn't look much like a princess in her zebra print leggings and sequin dress. Her fingernails were painted in a rainbow, each one a different primary color. Nina hid the cover in her lap. The book was about a princess, albeit a fantasy one. But it still felt strange to confess that to a real princess. "My little brother and I are reading a dragon series right now," Samantha declared, and tipped her head to one side. "Have you seen him? I can't find him." Nina shook her head. "I thought you were twins." She couldn't resist saying, "Yes, but I'm 4 minutes older, which makes Jeff my little brother." Samantha replied with irrefutable logic. "Want to help me look for him?" The princess was a storm of kinetic energy, skipping down the halls, constantly opening doors or peering behind furniture in search of her twin. The entire time she kept up a steady stream of chatter, her own greatest hits tour of the palace. "This room is haunted by the ghost of Queen Teresa. I know it's her because the ghost speaks French," she declared ominously, pointing at the shuttered downstairs parlor. "Or, I used to roller skate down these halls, till my dad caught me and said I couldn't. Beatrice did it too, but it never matters what Beatrice does." Samantha didn't sound resentful, just pensive. "She's going to be queen someday." "And what are you going to be?" Nina asked, curious. Samantha grinned. "Everything else." She led Nina from one unbelievable place to another, through storerooms of pressed linen napkins and kitchens that soared larger than ballrooms, where the chef gave them sugar cookies out of a painted blue jar. The princess bit into her cookie, but Nina tucked hers into her pocket. It was too pretty to eat. As they looped back down the bench, Nina was startled to see her mama walking down the hallway, chatting easily with the king. Their eyes lit on Nina, and she instinctively froze. The king smiled, a genial, boyish smile that made his eyes twinkle. "And who have we here?" Nina had never met a king before, yet some unbidden instinct, perhaps all the time she'd seen him on television, prompted her to bob into a curtsy. "This is my daughter, Nina," Isabella murmured. Samantha trotted over to her father and tugged at his hand. "Dad, can Nina come over again soon?" she pleaded. The king turned his warm eyes on Nina's mama. "Samantha is right. I hope you'll bring Nina here in the afternoons. After all, it's not like we have a short work day." Isabella blinked. "Your Majesty?" "The girls clearly get along, and I know your wife has a busy schedule too." Why should Nina stay home with a babysitter when she could be here? Nina was too young to understand Isabella's hesitation. Please, Mama? She chimed in, brimming with eagerness. Isabella had relented with a sigh, and just like that, Nina was interwoven into the lives of the royal twins. They became an instant threesome, the prince, the princess, and the chamberlain's daughter. Back then, Nina hadn't even known to feel self-conscious about the differences between her lives and Samantha's. For even though they were twins and royalty, Jeff and Sam never made Nina feel like an outsider. If anything, they were all equally excluded from the glamorous and inaccessible world of the adults, even from Beatrice, who at age 10 was already enrolled in private tutoring on top of her middle school courses. Sam and Jeff were always the instigators of their plans, with Nina trying and failing to keep them in line. They would escape the twins' nanny and set out on some escapade, to swim in the heated indoor pool or to find the rumored safe rooms and bomb shelters that were supposedly hidden throughout the palace. One time, Samantha convinced them to hide beneath a tablecloth and eavesdrop on a private meeting between the king and the Austrian ambassador. They were caught after just 2 minutes when Jeff tugged on the tablecloth and knocked over a pitcher of water, but by then Samantha had already squirted honey into the ambassador's shoe. If you don't want honey in your shoes, don't kick them off under the table, she'd said later, her eyes gleaming with mischief. The fact that Samantha and Nina's friendship had survived all these years was a testament to the princess's determination. She refused to let them drift apart, even though they went to different schools. Even after Nina's mama left her role as chamberlain and was named Minister of the Treasury, Samantha just kept on inviting Nina to the palace for sleepovers, or to the Washingtons' vacation homes for holiday weekends, or to attend state events as her plus one. Nina's parents had mixed feelings about their daughter's friendship with the princess. Isabella and Julie had met years ago in grad school. By now, they were one of Washington's power couples. Isabella working as Minister of the Treasury, Julie the founder of a successful e-commerce business. They didn't argue very often, but Nina's complicated relationship with the Washingtons was something they never managed to agree on. We can't let Nina go on that trip, Isabella had protested after Samantha invited Nina to the royal family's beach house. I don't want her spending too much time with them, especially when we aren't around. Nina's ears perked up at the sound of their voices, which echoed throughout the building's old-fashioned heating pipes. She was in her bedroom on the 3rd floor, beneath the attic. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she'd also never confessed how easily she could hear them when they spoke in the sitting room directly below. Why not? Julie had replied, her voice oddly distorted by the old metal pipes. Because I worry about her. The world that the Washingtons inhabit, with all its private planes and court galas and protocol, that isn't reality. And no matter how often they invite her or how much Princess Samantha likes her, Nina will never really be one of them. Nina's mama sighed. I don't want her feeling like a poor relation from some Jane Austen novel. Nina shifted closer on her mattress to catch the response. The princess has been a good friend to Nina, her mom protested, and you should have a little more faith in the way we've raised our daughter. If anything, I think Nina will be a positive influence on Samantha by reminding her what exists outside those palace gates. The princess probably needs a normal friend. Eventually, Nina's parents had agreed to let her go, with the stipulation that she stay out of the public eye and never be quoted or photographed in press coverage of the royal family. The palace had been happy to agree. They didn't particularly want the media focusing on Princess Samantha either. By the time they were in high school, Nina was used to her best friend's quirky plans and contagious excitement. Let's take Albert out, Sam would text, naming the lemon-yellow Jeep she'd begged her parents to give her on her 16th birthday. She had the car, but she kept failing the parallel parking part of her driver's test and still didn't have a license, which meant that Nina ended up driving that obnoxiously yellow Jeep all through the Capitol, with Samantha sitting cross-legged in the passenger seat, begging her to swing through McDonald's. After a while, Nina didn't even worry about the protection officer glowering at them from the back. Sam made it far too easy for Nina to forget the myriad differences between them, and Nina loved her, without strings or conditions, the way she would have loved a sister if she'd had one. It was just that her sister happened to be the Princess of America. But their relationship had subtly shifted over the past 6 months. Nina had never told Sam what happened the night of the graduation party, and the longer she kept it a secret, the greater the distance it seemed to wedge between them. Then Sam and Jeff went off on their whirlwind postgraduate trip, and Nina was starting her first year of college, and maybe it was all for the best anyway. This was Nina's chance to settle into a more normal life, one without the private planes and court galas and protocol that had so worried Isabella. She could go back to being her ordinary, real-world self. Nina hadn't told anyone at King's College that Samantha was her best friend. They would probably assume she was a liar, or if they did believe her, they might try to use her for her connections. Nina didn't know which outcome would be worse. Professor Urquhart clicked off the microphone, marking the conclusion of the lecture. Everyone stood in a shuffle of closing laptops and suppressed gossip. Nina scribbled a few final notes in her spiral before tossing it into her shoulder bag, then followed Rachel down the stairs and out into the courtyard. A few other girls from their hallway joined them, talking in excited tones about the Queen's Ball viewing party. They started toward the student center where everyone usually grabbed lunch after class, but Nina's steps slowed. A movement near the street had grabbed her attention. A black town car was idling at the curb, purring softly. Propped in the car window was a piece of white computer paper with Nina's name scrawled on it. She would recognize that handwriting anywhere. "Nina, are you coming?" Rachel called out. "Sorry, I have a meeting with my advisor," Nina fibbed. She waited a few more moments before racing across the lawn toward the car. In the back seat was Princess Samantha, wearing velour sweatpants and a white t-shirt through which Nina could see her pink bra. Nina hurried to join her, pulling the door shut before anyone could see. "Nina, I missed you!" Sam threw her arms around her friend in one of her typically effusive hugs. "I missed you too," Nina murmured into her friend's shoulder. A million questions burned on her lips. Finally, Samantha broke away, leaning forward to address the driver. "You can just circle campus for a while," she told him. Typical Sam, wanting to be in constant motion, even if she wasn't going anywhere. "Sam, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be getting ready for tonight?" Sam lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I'm kidnapping you and dragging you to the Queen's Ball as my +1. Nina shook her head. "Sorry, I have to work tonight." "But your parents will be there. I'm sure they'd love to see you." Sam let out a breath. "Please, Nina, I could really use some backup right now with my mom and dad. Didn't you just get home? What could they already be angry about?" "The last morning in Thailand, Jeff and I ran away from our protection officers," Sam admitted, looking out the window. They were driving up College Street toward the soaring Gothic architecture of Dandridge Library. "You ditched your bodyguards? How?" "We ran away from them," Samantha repeated, unable to suppress her smile. "Literally. Jeff and I turned and sprinted into oncoming traffic, weaving between the cars, then hitched a ride to an ATV rental place. We rode four-wheelers through the jungle. It was incredible." "That seems risky," Nina pointed out, and Sam laughed. "You sound just like my parents. See, this is why I need you. I was hoping that if you came with me tonight, I could keep you in line," Nina finished for her, as if she'd ever been able to control the princess. No power on earth could keep Samantha from doing something once she'd set her mind to it. "You know you're the good one." "I'm only the good one in comparison to you," Nina countered. That isn't saying much." "You should be grateful I set the bar so low," Sam teased. "Look, we can leave the reception early, grab some homemade cookie dough from the kitchen, stay up late watching bad reality TV. It's been ages since we had a slumber party." "Please," she said again, "I've really missed you." It was hard to ignore that kind of plea from your best friend. "I guess I could probably get Jody to trade shifts with me," Nina conceded, after a beat of hesitation so slight that Samantha probably hadn't even noticed it. "Thank you!" Sam gave an excited squeal and leaned forward to inform the driver of their new destination. Then she turned to Nina, pulling her slouchy leather bag onto her lap. "By the way, I bought you something from Bangkok." She dug through her bag, eventually emerging with a packet of pretzel M&Ms. The bright blue bag was covered in the gorgeous loops and curlicues of Thai script. "You remembered." M&Ms were Nina's favorite candy. Sam always brought a bag of them home from her foreign trips. She'd read somewhere that the formula was tweaked in each country and decided that she and Nina would have to taste test all of them. "So, how are they?" Sam asked as Nina popped one of the chocolate candies into her mouth. "Delicious." It was actually a little stale, but that wasn't surprising given how many miles it had traveled, smashed into the side pocket of Samantha's purse. They turned a corner and the palace swam into view. Far too soon for Nina's liking, but after all, King's College was only a couple of miles away. Virginia pines stretched tall and arrogant on either side of the street, which was lined with bureaucratic offices and thronged with people. The palace glowed a blazing white against the blue enamel of the sky. Its reflection danced in the waters of the Potomac, so that there seemed to be two palaces, one substantial, one watery and dreamlike. Tourists clung to the palace's iron gates, where a row of guards stood at attention, their hands raised in a salute. Above the circle drive, Nina saw the fluttering edge of the royal standard, the flag indicating that the monarch was officially in residence. She took a breath, steeling herself. She hadn't wanted to come back to the palace and risk seeing him. She still hated him for what happened the night of the graduation party. But more than that, Nina hated this small part of herself that secretly longed to see him, even after everything he had done.